Welcome to Sleep Tight Frights, the place where bedtime stories don't always end sweetly. I'm Evergrey, your storyteller in the shadows. Each tale is a little strange, a little spooky, and just creepy enough to keep you peeking over the covers. So settle in, close your eyes, but don't fall asleep just yet. Some fields grow food, some grow flowers, and some grow quiet. But every so often, a field remembers something it was never meant to. A voice, a name, a step that shouldn't have been taken. Tonight's story begins on a golden summer day, with a family heading out to hay, the last field left untouched. A field where the rows don't stay where they should, and the center is never where you left it. So lace up your boots, hold your breath, and try not to stray too far from the edge. This is The Rows Never Ended. The truck bounced hard over the dirt path, kicking up dust and grasshoppers. Nevaeh leaned against the window and stared out at the field. It was huge, golden, endless, and somehow wrong. Not in the way a field could be muddy or boring. This one felt quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like someone or something was holding its breath. "Why do we have to hay this one?" she asked. Her brother Jake looked up from his phone. "Because it's the last one." Their dad, gripping the steering wheel, didn't say anything at first. Then, almost too low to hear, he muttered, "Used to hay this one every summer." Nevaeh's mom frowned. "We stopped, remember? After the windrows twisted up that year?" Jake smirked. "You mean when Grandpa said the field tried to eat the tractor?" Dad let out a dry laugh. "He was just trying to scare me. Said the rows didn't end right. Said they bent." Nevaeh's stomach turned. Bent? Outside, the field waited. Tall hay shimmered in the late afternoon light, but the rows weren't straight. Not like usual. They curved just slightly, like something had dragged a giant rake in wide circles across the land. The truck rolled to a stop. "All right," Dad said. "We do this one fast. One afternoon. Grab what we can, then we're done." Nevaeh hopped out, the soles of her boots crunching on dry grass. The field towered over her, taller than her shoulders, thicker than usual, too. Jake got out slower, clearly not thrilled to help. "Why don't I just make TikToks about haying?" he said. "Would probably go viral." Nevaeh wandered towards the edge of the field while her parents started checking the equipment. The grass swayed just slightly in the breeze, but not all of it. Some stalks didn't move at all. She reached out and touched one. It was damp, not with dew. This was stickier, almost like sap or old sweat. She wiped her hand on her shorts and shivered. "It's just grass," she whispered to herself. But the hay didn't smell like summer. It smelled like breath. Behind her, the tractor rumbled to life. Jake rolled his eyes, grabbed a pitchfork, and followed their parents towards the lower edge of the field. "Don't go too far," her mom called over her shoulder. "We've got to stick together this time." "This time?" Nevaeh didn't ask. She looked one last time at the row of hay. They looked like lines, sentences. Words too big for her to read. She ran into them anyways, because she wasn't afraid of grass. Not yet. Nevaeh didn't mean to go far. Just a quick run through the fields, a little loop around the edge of the field. Maybe sneak up on Jake and poke him with a weed stem. Classic younger sibling stuff. The hay brushed against her shoulders as she ducked between rows. Some stalks crinkled underfoot, dry and curling. Others were oddly damp and green, like they'd been growing somewhere wetter. She didn't think much of it at first. The field felt alive, like it always did in late summer, thick with buzzing insects, sun-heated grass, and the distant cough of a tractor starting up. But once she passed the second row, then the third, she realized she couldn't hear the tractor anymore, or Jake, or her parents, only her own footsteps, and the strange rustling hush of hay on both sides. "I'm not that far," she muttered, "just around the bend." She turned left, thinking she was looping back towards the fence line, but instead of open space, there was more hay. She turned again, still hay, tall, swaying rows bending where they shouldn't. It felt like someone had dragged their finger across the field, rerouting every path behind her. Nevaeh spun around, confused. She should have been able to see the truck by now, or the garden hose they looped near the old fence, but all she saw was gold. Swaying, whispering, gold. She walked faster, turned a corner, then stopped. Right in front of her was a circle, a space in the center of a field where the hay had been flattened perfectly. No tire marks, no rakes, just a low, round patch of trampled grass. Okay. She stepped inside the clearing, and the moment she did, the paths closed. The wind picked up. Only it wasn't really wind, not the kind that rustles leaves or cools your neck. This wind whispered, low, layered, brushing her ears with something that sounded like words. She held her breath. Nothing. Then, hey, hey. Her name? Not quite. It was like the field was trying to say something, but didn't have the mouth to finish it. She turned sharply, goosebumps racing down her arms. The far end of the clearing wasn't empty anymore. Something had appeared. A hay bale. But it wasn't like the others stacked near the barn. This one hunched, lopsided, pressed together from odd pieces, too dark, too wet, like it had been buried underground and brought up, still breathing. Nevaeh stepped back. The bale didn't move, but the hay around it leaned forward just slightly, like it was listening. The air smelt wrong now, like compost, old barns, and animal breath. She turned and ran, back into the rows, but the rows weren't the same anymore. Every turn she took brought her back to the circle, back to the bale, and every time it was closer. Nevaeh stood perfectly still. She didn't blink, she didn't breathe. That thing wasn't a bale anymore, or maybe it had never been. It sat, no, crouched, at the edge of the flattened clearing, right where one of the curved rows opened its mouth like a tunnel. It hadn't made a sound, it hadn't shifted visibly, but it was closer than before, she was sure of it. Hay clung to its form in heavy mats, pressed together in ways hay shouldn't press. Instead of smooth straw, its shape was lumpy, like pieces of something else were buried inside. Fence wire, rusted iron, antler fragments. Nevaeh's skin crawled. Her legs screamed at her to move. She stepped back. Once, twice. The thing didn't flinch, but something around her did. She heard it, felt it, as a long, low breath rolled across the clearing. It ruffled her hoodie strings, stirred the hair at the nape of her neck, and carried with it a scent so thick and wrong she nearly gagged. It smelt like rain trapped in moldy barn walls, something long hidden and dead under leaves, a mixture of dirt, teeth, and warm breath that should never have come from grass. She turned and bolted into the nearest row. Nevaeh didn't care where she was going. She just needed to move. The hay slapped against her arm, cracked underfoot, and clutched at her clothing like it wanted to hold her back. Each turn she took came closer, more frantic. Left, right again. But the rows were changing, not in ways she could see exactly, but in a way she could feel. The ground sloped ever so slightly now. The air between the stalks was heavier, damp, like the inside of a greenhouse, but colder, like the breath of a cave. She pushed forward, panting. The hay rustled behind her. Not wind, footsteps, dragging, slow, deliberate. She spun around. Nothing, just golden rows curved like ribs around her. But when she looked down, she saw them. Tracks. Not boot prints, hoof prints. Sunken deep in the soil, 2 of them, then 2 more, wide and cracked, like hooves of something much heavier than a deer. Nevaeh's mouth went dry. She took 1 more step, and the hay rustled ahead of her this time, not behind. Ahead. She turned around, desperate to find an exit, and suddenly, just like before, she was back at the clearing. Only now, the creature was no longer crouched. It was rising. 2 hind legs thick with mud and splinters straightened slowly, unfolding like rotten barn beams. Bits of rake handle jutted out from one shoulder. A chunk of broken pitchfork dragged from the other. It was black. Its back was arched, ridged with twisted fence wire and scattered clumps of fur. And at the top, a cattle skull, sun-bleached, cracked, split just enough that the jaw could open, and it did, wide. Dry stalks poked from its mouth like teeth, some yellowed, some blood-browned at the tips. Inside the skull's hollow eye sockets, darkness swirled, deep and shifting. Then it inhaled, not through the nose, through the throat of the earth. Nevaeh stumbled back. Her boot caught on a root, and she hit the ground hard. The creature took a step forward, but it didn't thud, it didn't charge, it crept. And every movement sounded like tools scraping across stone. Nevaeh scrambled to her feet and fled again, sobbing now. The hay rows closed behind her like curtains. Every time she took a new turn, they bent tighter, folded in on themselves. She wasn't running through a field anymore. She was running through a chest, a set of lungs. The whole maze was breathing her in, and at the center, it waited, because the maze always brought her back. Jake tossed his pitchfork into the grass and flopped down on the tailgate of the truck. His parents were still working along the lower slope, checking belts and blades of the hay rake like they were prepping for battle. Jake scrolled aimlessly on his phone. No bars, of course. He sighed. Nevaeh should be back by now. He waited a little longer, then stood and called out, "Nevaeh, hey, come on, we gotta work." No answer. He climbed onto the edge of the hay rolls and cupped his hands. "You're not funny." Nothing but a soft hiss of wind moving through the stalks. Only, it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like whispers. Not sharp ones, not angry ones, but old, dry, tired, like pages in a forgotten book turning themselves. They rolled out onto the field in a steady hum, curling through the stalks and into Jake's ears. He turned towards the sound. "Nevaeh?" He tried again, but the whisper didn't say her name. It said something else, a name he didn't know. Callum. Jake froze. Callum. He never heard his parents mention that name before, but it carried the weight of something old, something buried. The name whispered again, louder this time. Callum. Callum. He took a step into the hay, and just like that, the windrows parted slightly ahead of him, inviting him in. He hesitated, glanced back at the truck. No one was looking. He stepped forward. Meanwhile, at the center of the maze, Nevaeh couldn't scream anymore. Her voice was gone, swallowed by the breathing of the field. The creature, the haythorn, stood tall now, its full shape exposed in the dying light. It didn't move fast. It didn't have to. It circled the clearing with slow, deliberate steps. Each one pressed the hay lower, folding the stalks down like someone tucking in a blanket made of knives. Nevaeh clutched a broken stalk in her hand like a weapon. It trembled. So did she. The haythorn turned towards her fully, its skull face tilted, almost curious. The air around it buzzed with insects that didn't make noise, just hovered in twitching spirals near its hooves. Its ribcage was a mess of twine and rusted wire. Its back moved, like it was breathing through dozens of teeny holes, or maybe something inside of it was still trying to get out. The creature reached one gnarled limb towards her, not fast, not threatening, just reaching, like it was used to being obeyed. Then, somewhere deep in the maze, a whisper changed directions. It stopped saying Callum. It started saying, "Here." Jake followed the whispers until his foot caught on something half-buried, near a rotten scarecrow. He stumbled, caught himself, and looked down. It wasn't a root, it was wood, an old carved blade, splintered, worn smooth in places. Someone had carved a single name into the handle, just visible under the dirt and moss. Callum. Jake picked it up. The blade was too light to be useful, but when he touched it, the hay around him tensed, and the whispering stopped. Back in the center, the haythorn stilled. It reared back slightly, sniffing the air, if it could sniff. Then it turned its skull away from Nevaeh, towards the sound, towards Jake. Jake turned the blade over in his hands. It wasn't metal. It looked like old oak carved from a fence post maybe, and whittled to a point that had long since dulled. But the name buried into the hilt still shimmered faintly, like it had been carved just yesterday. Callum. The whispers started again, softer this time. It didn't come from one direction anymore. It came from everywhere. From the top of the hay rows, from beneath the soil, from inside the blade itself. He fed the field. The field remembers. The blade remembers too. Jake swallowed hard. He turned back towards the truck, but the rows had already shifted behind him. The trail was gone. All that remained was a curved path that led inward. He gripped the blade and stepped into the maze. Every step felt heavier than the last. The hay rows pressed in closer the further he walked, growing taller and tighter until they brushed his shoulder and blocked out the sun. The air changed, cooler now, and full of dust that tickled the back of his throat. The rows didn't feel like plants anymore. They felt like walls. The whispers kept going, soft, steady, less like words now, more like instructions his bones already knew. Left, 2 more. Turn, stop. At first he thought he was imagining it, but then he noticed each time he followed the whispers exactly, the hay seemed to give underfoot. The paths became easier to walk, lighter, like something deep in the field wanted him to come. Back at the clearing, Nevaeh crouched low, hidden behind a fold in the hay. Her breathing was shallow, silent, like she'd practiced during hide-and-seek games. But this wasn't a game. The haythorn towered over the center of the maze now, sniffing the wind with its jagged skull face. The pitchfork in its spine rattled when it moved. Its hooves dragged dryly across the flattened hay, leaving blackened prints behind. It was listening, waiting, and then suddenly it turned. Its shoulders jerked, its entire body tensed like a puppet being pulled upright. And then it left. It walked. Not towards her, but into one of the outer rows, away from the center, away from her. Nevaeh blinked. The moment it vanished, the air in the clearing changed. It no longer felt suffocating, just still and sharp. Something else was coming now. Jake paused at the curve in the path. The whispers stopped. In front of him was a wall of tangled hay, but the blade in his hand warmed just slightly. Jake held it tight and stepped forward. As he touched the wall, the stalks parted. A narrow tunnel opened into the maze's heart, and far ahead, at the very center, he saw her, Nevaeh, and something behind her, moving fast. The blade pulsed in Jake's hand like a heartbeat. It shouldn't have. It was just wood, old, splintered, dull as drift, but somehow it knew where to go. The hay had opened for him, clearing a narrow passage that wound like a snake towards the center. He followed it. The hay rows whispered no longer. Now they watched. He could feel it. Every stalk leaned slightly towards him, dry tips brushing his sleeves like fingers. The light had changed too. Gone was the golden shimmer of sunset. In its place was a greenish-gray gloom, like the world had gone under a thick storm cloud. Jake didn't call Nevaeh's name. He didn't want to draw attention, not from the thing he knew was there. He crept forward, his boots pressed into the soil, now wet and spongy. Old hair clung to the ground in rotten mats. Here and there, strange objects jutted from the earth. A rusty shovel, half a jawbone, a child's boot with grass growing through it. Jake tightened his grip on the blade. Then he heard it. Nevaeh's voice. Jake? Faint, frantic, close. He broke into a run. Nevaeh backed up until her spine hit the hay wall behind her. She clutched a broken stick in one hand. Her whole body ached from running, ducking, hiding, but she wasn't crying anymore. Her fear had dried into something sharper, something quiet. She watched as the haythorn stepped into the clearing again. This time, it moved with purpose. It wasn't creeping, it wasn't waiting. It had felt the threat. It had smelled the blade. And now, it was hunting. Jake stumbled into the clearing and froze. The creature was taller than he had imagined, at least 8 feet. Its ribcage was packed with broken tools and fence knots, and the cattle skull that served as its head was cracked open just wide enough to show rows of snapped brownish-yellow hay teeth inside. Nevaeh saw him. "Jake!" The haythorn turned. Its head twitched, not smoothly, but like something glitching inside a broken puppet. It opened its mouth. A long, wet exhale rolled out. It sounded like wind in a silo. Then it charged. "Run!" Jake shouted, but Nevaeh couldn't move. Not fast enough, at least. He didn't think. He lifted the blade and slammed it into the earth. The moment it struck, the maze shuddered. A deep groan rolled through the field, low and pained, like the land itself was waking up. The hay flared outwards in waves, rippling like water. The haythorn stumbled mid-charge and stopped. Its hooves sank into the soil. Its jaw clicked open, but instead of a roar, a screech came out. Not a scream of rage, a scream of fear. The earth buckled around it. The hay rose folded inward, and the haythorn began to sink. Its limbs flailed, tearing stalks down with it. Barbed wire whipped across the clearing. Its skull twisted, trying to find Jake, trying to see the blade one last time. But it was too late. The maze swallowed it, and the field fell silent. Nevaeh collapsed into Jake's arms. He was shaking, she was freezing. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Nevaeh whispered, "How did you find me?" Jake looked down at the carved blade, now pale and cracked. "I followed the whispers," he said, "and I listened." The ground was still vibrating, not violently, just enough that the hay trembled its stalks, as if the whole field had been holding in breath for years and had finally let it out. Nevaeh and Jake stayed where they were, curled together in the center of the clearing, neither daring to move. Around them, the hay had slumped inwards like a collapsed house. The maze was folding in on itself, row by row, like it had finished its work and wanted to lie back down. The blade still jutted from the dirt, but it was no longer glowing. The name Callum had faded into the wood, the carving now worn smooth as if hundreds of hands had passed over it, and then none at all. Jake reached for it, but the moment his finger touched the handle, it crumbled, turned to dust. Gone. "Is it over?" Nevaeh whispered. Jake nodded, but neither of them truly believed it. They stood slowly, arms aching, legs unsteady. Nevaeh's face was streaked with dirt and hay dust. Jake's palms were full of blisters. The hay rows around them were still shifting, but not in a chasing way now. It was more like guiding, opening. "They want us to go," Jake said. "Now would be nice," Nevaeh muttered. They stepped forwards together, and to their surprise, the field let them. The hay parted in front of them, not wide, but just enough, like it had remembered what it was supposed to be, a path, a way home. Each row they passed seemed to sigh behind them, curling inward again. The deeper they went, the more they noticed how unnatural the field had become. Fence posts swallowed into the dirt, half-rotten equipment buried beneath the grass, a child's ribbon caught on a broken rake tooth, old footprints now filling in with loose soil. The haythorn hadn't been the only thing taken by the maze. They broke through the edge of the field just as the sun was sinking below the trees. Jake's mom spotted them first. "Oh my! Nevaeh? Jake?" Their dad was already running. "I told you to stay close." But when he saw their faces, saw the way they looked like they'd been dug from the middle of a storm, he said nothing more, just pulled them both into his arms. Later, after the truck was loaded and the family sat quietly in the front seat, Nevaeh turned to Jake. "Did you really hear the field whisper?" Jake nodded. "Yeah." "What did it say?" He hesitated. "It said, 'The field remembers everyone it's fed, but it also remembers who fed it back.'" Nevaeh blinked. "What does that mean?" Jake looked out the window. The field was still visible in the rearview mirror. Just golden hay now, just rows. But only for now. "I don't think it ever forgets," he said. "It just waits." 3 days later, the field looked normal. The family hadn't returned since the haying, not even to pick up what little they gathered. Nevaeh's dad said the grass wasn't worth the work. Her mom said the rows were too patchy, too uneven. Jake said nothing at all. But Nevaeh knew they were lying. It wasn't the grass, it was the center. They hadn't spoken about the maze, about the thing in the clearing, about the blade or the whispers or the bones curled beneath the soil. It was easier that way. If you don't name the thing that haunts you, maybe it forgets your taste. Nevaeh sat on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the sun dip low behind the barn. In the distance, the hayfield shimmered gold again. It danced lightly in the wind, gentle, harmless, but she knew better now. That field could pretend. It could play dead, but she had heard it breathing. She had seen what waited where the rose twisted. Jake joined her on the porch, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "You sleep at all?" he asked, handing her one. Nevaeh shrugged. "Tried." He sat beside her for a while. They didn't speak. Then, softly, Jake asked, "Do you think it's gone?" Willa stared across the field. "No." "Do you think it'll come back?" "It doesn't have to," she said. He frowned. "Why?" Nevaeh pointed just once towards the center of the field. At first, Jake didn't see anything. Then he did, just for a second. A circle, flattened, perfectly round, waiting. And in the exact center of the circle, a single stalk stood taller than the rest, curved, dry, almost like the tip of a horn. Did you know hayfields and harvest have long been linked to ghost stories and strange disappearances? In rural folklore, people used to say that if your hay rows were crooked, it meant something older had walked through them during the night. And in some places, folks refused to hay certain fields because the grass grew too fast, too thick, and never in the same pattern twice. It wasn't bad luck, they said. It was the land remembering. Some monsters live in shadows, some hide in closets, and some wait in plain sight, golden, silent, patient. The scariest ones don't chase, they watch, and they remember. They wait for someone to take the wrong step. The truth is, some places feel wrong because they are, because something was buried there, because something is still hungry. If you ever find yourself haying an old field and the rows begin to bend, don't follow them. Don't listen to the whispers, and never ever go towards the center, because if the field remembers you, it won't let go. Thank you for listening to Sleep Tight Frights. This tale was written and read by me, Evergrey, your guide through the dark corners of bedtime. If you loved The Rose Never Ended, share it with someone brave, someone who thinks they'll never get lost in the maze of hay. Let's see how far they'd really make it. Tag us with your favorite line, follow for more new stories every week, and if you draw the haythorn, send it in. We'd love to see your version of what waits at the center. As always, sleep tight, little hay runner. Thank you for listening to Sleep Tight Frights. It means more than you know, to us and to the things that listen back. I'm Evergrey, your guide through the shadows, and if you felt something was watching as the story unfolded, you're not alone. They remember the ones who listen, they wait for the ones who return. So come back soon. Sleep tight if you can.